music, and sacred space. We give with the faith that together we have enough. We will now have a moment of silence so that we can open our minds and hearts to the place of quiet, to the silent prayer for the healing of pain and the soft, gentle coming of love. Instead of a reading, I decided to try to find quotes from humanitarians, and there are 10 that I will be reading, and I will read the quote first and then the person who said it. Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And that's Mother Teresa. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Nelson Mandela. Let us remember, one book, one pen, one child, and one teacher can change the world. Malala Yousafzai. You must be the change you want to see in the world. Mahatma Gandhi. Whoever saves one life saves the world entire. Oscar Schindler. You'll have to forgive pronunciation if I'm not saying it correctly, but Elie Wiesel. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. In the face of adversity, girls can rise. We can't wait for the world to change. We have to be the change. Malika Judd. The idea that some lives matter less is the root of all that's wrong with the world. Dr. Paul Farmer. The only real prison is fear, and the only real freedom is freedom from fear. And that's Aung San Suu Kyi. She was, Burmese, right, thank you. And she endured 10 years of house arrest. And anyway. And the last one is, to me, there is no other choice. I've accepted this assignment, and I'll stand by it no matter what happens. And that's Raoul Wallenberg. And now, our speaker.
Well, thank you very much, Carrie, for those really inspirational words from some of the best known humanitarians in the world. I just found it very, very inspiring to listen to what they had to say. But thank you so much for your very warm welcome here on this beautiful day in Door County. I always love to come to Door County, but especially when it's sunny and the beautiful fall weather like this. Now, I must admit that it was not easy to prepare for the talk today. I've done a few of these, and I always look forward to getting my notes together and doing the planning and essentially working out what I'm going to say. But I proposed this topic to Sarah on December 18th of 2024. Now that seems like a long time ago now. Then I was thinking of doing a sort of a practical talk about how to make humanitarian aid work better, mostly by sharing some of my experiences in small projects in West Africa that complement the big, important aid projects carried out by donor governments in the United Nations. What I didn't know last December was that in the coming year, the United States, the biggest donor in terms of money, total amount of money, would eliminate over 80% of its aid projects entirely, and that by July, the U.S. Agency for International Development, which had been created in 1961 by the Kennedy administration, would be shuttered, all its employees fired, and completely disbanded. I also didn't expect that both the British and the French government would cut their foreign aid, it's called overseas development assistance, by 40%. I didn't expect that Germany would cut its emergency relief budget by 50%, or that the humanitarian agencies of the European Union and the UN would be in a dire budgetary crisis, which they are right now. And just to give you one example of that, the refugees in a camp in Kenya have lost 2/3 of their support for food. This was just reported 2 weeks ago. And they're in a quandary about what to do with this for the hundreds of people in this camp. It was a World Food Program program. So I didn't expect all of that last December, but yet now I know that 2025 is going to be remembered as the year when the governments of some of the richest, most powerful countries in the world changed their spending priorities away from the needs of some of the poorest, most vulnerable people in the world. Now, priorities change, and that is the realm of politics. But even as priorities in politics change, human needs also remain constant. Global hunger, for instance, has not gone away. And in fact, since 2020, there are more than double the number of people facing acute food security, over 300 million people in 53 countries. Access to education is still an issue. In Africa, home to the largest numbers of out-of-school children, there are more than 125 million kids who aren't in school, and that number is rising, in part due to a rising number of conflicts on the continent. So my point here is that while governments may reprioritize their spending, which is their right as elected governments, the human needs often remain. And for us, as citizens, as people of the world, moral imperatives remain as well. Now, I'm thinking here of the 7 UU principles. And then there's 3 in particular I want to talk about. The first one that has that radical idea that there's an inherent worth and dignity in every person. One of the most radical ideas in the world, probably. Number 6 sets the goal of a world community with peace, with liberty, and with justice for all. And then number 7 calls for the respect of the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part, which to me means that in an interdependent world, what happens in one place is going to impact something somewhere else. And so because of that, we're called to be concerned about things that may be far away geographically, but can be close in other ways. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think that I actually need to address 2 questions instead of 1. However, because I don't think I have time for 2 little mini talks, I'm going to condense and see if I can address these 2 important questions. So the first one is really a philosophical one. It's this: in a world of shifting priorities, why should we advocate for the needs of the most vulnerable, even if those most vulnerable live in a country that is not our own? It's the first question. But the second one is that if we answer the first question that yes, we should, how is it possible to assist vulnerable people that are at a physical distance from us? How can that be done? So that's what I'd like to just talk about a few minutes today. Now, in thinking about these questions, I'm reminded that they're not entirely new, and they are questions that humanitarian advocates have faced before. And again, this is why I really appreciate the quotations, because when you think of Raoul Wallenberg, Elie Wiesel, some of the people, Mother Teresa, they have faced challenges, humanitarian challenges that are very, very serious, over time. Last spring, I had the pleasure to be in London on my sabbatical from Lawrence University, and while I was there, I was researching the Save the Children Fund, which is one of the oldest professional humanitarian agencies in the world. I'm sure most of you have heard about it. What you may not know about it, it was started after World War I by 2 sisters, Eglantine Jebb and Dorothy Buxton. And it's one of the first big international aid agencies that wasn't religious in nature, that wasn't connected to a church. And it had a lot of female employees because it sort of coincided with women getting the right to vote in the UK and the US. Now, Eglantine Jebb was the sister who led this organization, and she was a rare person. The daughter of a parson in Shropshire. She had gone to Oxford University as a young woman when they just started to admit women. This is in the end of the 19th century, before women could vote in Britain. She became a teacher and a tireless worker for the rights of well-being of children, no matter who they were or where they lived. But she was also very practical. She wanted aid to be efficient, transparent, and essentially reach the people that it was supposed to reach. So she was what I would call a professional worker as well as a humanitarian. She had that mix of idealism and practicality that made things work. Now, Eglantine Jebb was a woman of the most decided opinions. She did not see child neglect, abuse, and exploitation as natural or unavoidable. Instead, that she insisted that hungry children should be fed, that sick children should be nursed, that orphan children should be given shelter, and that all children should be brought up to fulfill the great potential that they had in life. Now, these ideas may seem non-controversial enough, but in 1921, Eglantine Jebb found herself in a media storm over one of the policies of Save the Children Fund, which was to provide food to starving children who were located in Russia. This, of course, was controversial because the Russian Revolution had recently taken place. Newspaper headlines led by the Daily Express, which if it were essentially in existence today would be some kind of a trolling social media group, hammered that aid was too expensive, too inefficient, and most of all, too foreign, as no funds should be spent outside the country, England, when there were any needy children within it. Now, Eglantine, who had been trained at Oxford, fired back with newspaper articles, pamphlets, all sorts of ways to try and defend her organization, which carried out feeding for children in the Sarkov area of what's the Volga region of Russia, and saved thousands of lives. These are some of the arguments she put forward. It's not too expensive to end child labor. And in fact, if you don't educate children, it's going to cost more in the long run. She insisted that the rich did have obligations to the poor. She also argued that overpopulation couldn't be solved just by letting children die, which was one of the arguments of the day. She also said there were practical ways to help people. And most of all, we should be concerned about children because they represented the future of the world. Human hopes depended on them, even the ones living in foreign countries. Eglantine Jebb believed in the power of human action to alleviate human suffering, just as Mother Teresa did, just as Raoul Wallenberg, just as any number of other great humanitarians of the past. Now, Eglantine Jebb did care very much about children locally, and the Save the Children Fund provided milk in school and really offered a whole range of programs within the British Isles. But what she was certain of is that if we know about something, if it impacts us, we can't just exclude it from our orbit. We can't exclude from our concerned people just because they're far away in a different country, they speak a different language. In other words, she believed in the interdependence of the world. And therefore, she asserted that there's a moral obligation to help children no matter where they are, everywhere, no matter where they might live. Now, I find the words of Eglantine Jebb persuasive, and I certainly wouldn't have liked to have been on the end of her commentary back in 1921. I think what it means, though, for me today is that if we accept her logic, we can't ignore places where needs are the greatest. Yes, we should be concerned about our community, and obviously your fellowship is very active with children here in the area, with environmental issues. Those are all very good things. But what someone like Eglantine Jebb is saying is that in a world that we live in, our area of concern has to include people who are the most neediest in the world, in some absolute sense. Now, where are those children today? Well, I would say many of those children are living in Africa. If you look at the World Bank, which classifies countries by income, There are 24 countries in the world that are of the lowest income. And of those 24 countries, 21 are in Africa, and only 3 are somewhere else. So Africa is a region where poverty is the most concentrated, and with it hunger and strife and educational problems and lack of water and all the things that get packed in when people have very, very low incomes. So now you can see that I've wound up at the topic of Africa. And of course, now we're in the topic of Sierra Leone, where I've spent the last 20 years working. Sierra Leone is a small country in West Africa. In the 1990s, it had a devastating civil war. And when I started to work there 20 years ago, 95% of the schools in the country had been destroyed in the war. Now, the country has made progress since then, but its GDP per capita is still $800, which places it among, it bounces around between number 2 poorest, number 3 poorest, number 10. It's in the very poorest group of low-income countries. So the question that I have now is a practical one. If we are concerned with some of the most vulnerable people in the world, how can we make a difference in their lives? And particularly, how can we make a difference in the lives of children, in the educational specter for these children? Especially now that so many of the big agencies have just thrown up their hands and said they can't do it, and have essentially left the field, just closed their programs and left. Well, my answer is this, that change is still possible, and one way to do it is through small projects. Small projects can have a big impact, perhaps surprisingly, but yes, they can. Now, you might be wondering what I mean by small. One way they're small is in terms of the money that's involved in them. A typical aid project that's sponsored by a government or a UN agency is going to run between $1 million and $10 million. It'll be carried out multi-year. It'll be carried out through one or more countries throughout the country in many districts. And that's how it gets to be big. Where a small project costs less. It might be less than $100,000, but smaller in terms of the money expended. And I think this is why this is very important, because the money that is available for aid projects now is not going to be what it was in the past, no matter what happens in the future. But small projects aren't small in terms of what they try and do. They're often longer in terms of their length. A typical aid project lasts from 1 to maybe 3 years, and that's it. Where a small project can be over a long period of time. And that often means it has a much bigger impact because it allows change to happen. A small project can be deep in that it can reach in its support directly into the local community with organizations supporting their plans and ideals. Now, an example of this is what Paul Farmer, who founded Partners in Health, and was quoted in the list of humanitarians, calls a strategy of augmentation. I can hear what you're thinking. That's great, Dina. Africa's a long way off. How could we ever possibly do that? The only answer that I have to that is I've seen people do it. And I just want to tell you about a couple of the projects that I've observed and one that I've worked with. And then happy to share many more in the talk back. So one concerns the First United Church of Christ Church in Appleton. It's a UCC church there. And since 1999, they've carried on a partnership with a fellow congregation in the Kiro Valley District of Kenya. Now, the heart of this program is scholarships. The church raises money for scholarships for children in this school in this valley in Kenya. And they've supplied hundreds of kids with scholarships over the years, going on almost now 20 years. But the project is more than that. The congregations exchange visit. People from Appleton go to Kenya, and then the visitors, the leaders from Kenya, come and visit the church in Appleton. And hopefully they don't come in the winter because they would be very cold. But it's more than just the money. Do you see what I mean? It's the exchange of the communities that makes this work, where people can listen and learn from each other. And yes, the church in Appleton can contribute to the education for these children that might otherwise not go to high school, which is a great expense in an African family typically. But at the same time, they learn from the visits of the Kenyans to Appleton. So it's not a huge project. It doesn't cost a lot of money. But I think a project like that has a big impact, in part because it's been carried on so long. It's an ongoing thing. Now, I think another place to look at what I'm talking about is in the projects of the Rotary organization. Now, I'm sure many of you want to hear has heard of the Rotary Club. Some of you may be members of the Rotary, or you may know people who are involved in this. But what you may not know is that Rotary is a very special organization because it's organized at different levels. It has the local chapters in, say, a community like Sturgeon Bay or Green Bay or Appleton that are very active in the local communities in all way. But they're connected then with Rotary International, which has a global scope and connects them to clubs in other places in the world. This makes it possible for a local club in a city, say in Wisconsin, to work on a project that's somewhere else in the world with the expertise and some guidance from Rotary International. Now, I have some experience with this myself. In 2016, the organization that I work with at Lawrence University, Kids Give, did a water project at a school in Sierra Leone. We worked with the Appleton Rotary Club, Northeast Wisconsin, which is kind of centered around Green Bay, and then Rotary International to connect with the Freetown Rotary Club in order to provide this well. Now, this was a very special well. It's what's called a borehole well, so it means it's dug deep into the aquifer so you can have clean water. And then it was powered by solar panels, so you have a pump that brings the water up to the surface. The idea for the well came from one of my students. When we were visiting the school, they noticed the kids were thirsty. We can talk about hunger, that impacts learning, but if you're thirsty, it's also a major problem as well. Another one of my students did a study and found out while the school had a well, it was only 15 feet deep. It was downstream from the toilets, so I won't go into the details, but you can imagine what happened there. And that it was frequently contaminated, so it had to be shut. So the well that they had was completely inadequate for the 600 children that were at the school. So the well went in 2016, 9 years ago. It was a small project. It cost $30,000 for the well, the equipment. The biggest part of it was digging the well, which was $15,000 because they had to rent the borehole equipment. The solar panels had to be imported. The rest of it then was created there. So it's a small project. Last August, I went back to Sierra Leone. I visited the school and the well. I went up to, there's a kind of a building that the water taps are in. I turned on the taps. The water comes out clear as you can imagine, fresh, and I drank some of it. Now, this may seem like a lot because we kind of take for granted that you're going to go in and turn on a faucet and water will run out. But in the aid world, this is a near miracle because that well went in 9 years ago. And according to UNICEF, the typical well in the country lasts only 3 years before it breaks. So what's the difference here? Well, I think the difference is that this was a small project. And when this well was set up, it was set up with a school management committee that monitored to the well to make sure that it wasn't damaged, that it was protected. And that school management committee, when the pump broke, they raised money to replace the pump. They were able to fix the well. But you know why? Because that well was theirs. All we did was help them to build that well so they could have that at their community. And that's what I mean, small project, big impact, because what the small is doing is adding to what people are doing at another location to make that lasting, sustainable for them over the long run. Now, I have lots of other examples that I could share, but all I'm really trying to say is that I believe that there are lots of examples of what Eglantine Jebb talked about, is that human action can alleviate human problems. Human action can alleviate human problems. No person solves all problems themselves, but working together, we can enable children around the world to get one step closer to that life of dignity that everybody deserves. Now, there are a lot of problems in the world today, but I want to just leave the group with a challenge, which is a challenge that I have for myself, to think about how we and the organizations we work with can work in partnership with people everywhere to create the world of which we dream, the world where people have liberty and justice for all, and every child, every single one, has a bright future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Please rise as you are able for hymn 338. Grace, would you please join me again? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you.